When you picture a typical American front yard, what do you see? If you're like most suburban Americans, you probably envision a street after street of lush, green, perfectly manicured lawns. In fact, between 40 to 50 million acres in the United States are covered with lawns. That's about 35 million football fields, or enough to cover all of Florida. All these acres of turf grass look nice, but they are a huge ecological problem. First of all, lawns are thirsty. The turf grasses used in most lawns have much shorter roots than native plants, which mean they require a lot more water to stay green. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that watering landscapes uses about a third of all residential water. That's 9 billion gallons of water per day in just the United States. Imagine filling up over 13,600 Olympic swimming pools with water and paying $13.5 million for it. And you still wouldn't use as much water as lawns do each year. On top of that, maintaining a turf grass lawn creates surprisingly large carbon footprint. Gas power mowers and other lawn equipment are an obvious culprit. Data from the U.S. Department of Transportation shows that Americans used nearly 3 billion gallons of gasoline in 2018 with lawn and garden equipment. Using today's average gas prices of $3.20 per gallon, that's about $9.5 billion spent each year. You may be surprised to learn that lawns themselves emit a lot of nitrous oxide. When you apply synthetic fertilizers to a lawn, bacteria in the soil break down excess nitrogen to release nitrous oxide, which has close to 300 times the warming impact as equivalent amounts of carbon dioxide. A study published in the Journal of Environmental Management found that Americans produce the equivalent of 25 million tons of CO2 each year just in routine lawn care. Moreover, most traditional turf grasses are less effective in capturing and storing carbon than deeper-rooted native plants that are better adapted to local soils. Finally, water pollution is another unintended consequence of our national obsession with lawns. We spread over 70 million pounds of pesticides on their lawns each year to keep them free from unwanted insects and weeds. Excess pesticides and fertilizer wash off into the local water supply, polluting local streams, lakes, and coastal waters. Although these facts sound dire, simple things can be done to remedy the problem. One solution is water-wise landscaping, or designing landscapes and gardens to reduce or eliminate the need of excessive water irrigation. It's a simple and impactful way for homeowners and businesses to dramatically cut their water use and carbon emissions and create a carbon-capturing habitat for birds and pollinators. Pumps and Pipes decided to put the sustainable solution to the test when our communications director Laura and her husband Chris moved to Colorado Springs, an area known for being very dry with extreme temperature changes.
Coming from Houston, which, it's wet, it's hot, it's humid, our biggest climate threats were basically we had hurricanes and flooding. And then I moved here to the Colorado Front Range where it's, has much greater temperature swings. It's very dry. So I had to totally readjust my gardening mentality. And so when we first moved in and I looked out at this lawn, which, it wasn't a nice lawn. It was just a lot of weeds and dead trees. I mainly saw a big waste of water. So I decided that water-wise gardening was probably the way to go. And I set out to learn as much as I could from local experts before we got started.
So we're here today at the Colorado Springs Utilities Waterwise Demonstration Garden. Can you tell me a bit about your role here?
Sure. I'm a senior water conservation specialist with Colorado Springs Utilities. We're a municipally owned utility, and we provide water to about 500,000 people in the area. And so our Waterwise Demonstration Garden, which is part of my role to help people use water wisely in the landscape, the whole role of the garden is to help demonstrate how people can get all the benefits from a landscape and still use water responsibly.
Colorado Springs get just 18 inches of rain per year on average, almost half of the national average for rainfall. Most of the area's water has to be piped in for western Colorado, which is experiencing years of devastating drought. So like many homeowners, Laura and Chris wanted to play their part to conserve this precious resource.
How do you approach people who are like, well, I want to put this into practice, but there are a million plants out here I can use and not really knowing how to start.
Yeah, that's why we built this Waterwise neighborhood, is to boil down the key principles that we've learned through the older part of the garden into something really tangible that people can apply in their own landscape. So where we're standing right now, this is the Easy Care landscape, because when we surveyed people, one of the major challenges they have is yard work. The maintenance of all of it. That can be a real barrier for people. So we wanted to create a model front yard that actually only requires all the plants to be cut back once in spring. So what you're seeing around you is a plant bed that only requires spring cleanup. So we have Dalmatian iris right here, which is this beautiful variegated iris with purple flowers. We also have basket of gold, which is this beautiful spring bloomer here. So that really reduces the maintenance in the plant bed. And then we have buffalo grass, which is a Waterwise native grass, as our front lawn, which only requires being mowed, once a month.
Really?
So that can really reduce the maintenance and can be watered once per week or less. This is our foothills landscape. The three biggest concerns for people who live in the foothills overlay in our community are steep slopes, constant deer pressure, and then the threat of wildfire. This is our low-cost landscape model. A lot of people that we talked to had trouble affording to do a landscape installation or renovation, and we wanted to make sure that we could provide them with an option that would be a reasonable cost.
Okay. And so can you tell me a little bit about what plants are in here?
Sure. This is Sensation Rose Salvia, and this is a beautiful plant that has, a really attractive mounding habit, and then we'll have spikes of pink flowers very similar to blue salvia. And so what I really love about this landscape is that we figured out how to create a Waterwise landscape that didn't cost a lot to install. So we estimated that this cost about $600 to put in the ground. You can build a drip irrigation system off of a spigot on the side of your house, so you don't need to install an expensive irrigation system. And then we calculate that on average, the cost of the water to sustain this landscape would be about $5 a month. So what I'd like to show you here is that you have this type of flexible drip irrigation tubing that has emitters built into the pipe. They're manufactured inside, so this controls how much water drips out of this pipe. And it's really nice because you can move it around. Because this tubing is flexible, you can change where the tubing is based on what your planting is. So this is the drip irrigation pipe that you get that is a solid pipe. And then when you know where you want the water to come out, you install these drip irrigation emitters in the place where you want the water to drip out of the pipe. The grass clippings will help conserve the moisture in the top layers of soil. So we usually put the drip irrigation on top of the soil surface and then cover it up.
We're here today with Dr. Irene Shonle from the Colorado State University Extension, and she works with the horticulture program here in El Paso County. So thank you for joining us, Irene.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.
I would like to kind of get behind the science of, what are the principles of waterwise gardening that people should follow?
Yeah, so, the first is just to make a plan, right? So you can't just sort of willy-nilly do waterwise gardening. You have to actually do a little research and then do a little planning. And so part of that planning is to do hydrozoning. And hydrozoning just means that you plant plants with similar water and sun, well, particularly water, but also sun needs together. So you wouldn't plant a thirsty plant next to a plant that doesn't need as much water, because then you are going to overwater the plant that likes it to be dry, and you're going to underwater the plant that likes it wet.
Okay.
And so that way you can water more efficiently.
Is there a difference between xeriscaping and waterwise gardening?
Not really. It's really the same principle, but people, when they hear xeriscaping, they hear xeroscaping, and then they tend to think of the lawn with the landscape fabric and then the rock mulch and nothing else. And most people don't find that a really attractive look. And so just to say that it's just waterwise gardening. And so if you garden thoughtfully, you're not going to be, it can be a gorgeous garden, but it's waterwise, which is also the same thing.
Like this is very lush.
Yeah, this is xeric, but it's not zero.
Okay.
So that's the difference.
Of course, there are more ways to make your landscape sustainable than turning your front yard into a waterwise garden. One sustainable alternative is to use your yard to feed your community. Boundless Landscapes is a Boulder, Colorado-based company leading innovation in the lawn to food movement. They work with homeowners to transform lawns into healthy, ecological, regenerative vegetable gardens. Mara Rose, co-founder and CEO of Boundless Gardens, met with Laura at a new backyard garden installation to show how applying similar principles as the one used in Waterwise Gardening could help create a new model for sustainable, community-embedded agriculture.
Tell me how you got started with Boundless Landscapes.
Yeah, I mean, we really started just thinking about the idea of using a micro solution to tackle a macro problem. And the macro problem is that we have way too many lawns in America. They are the largest cultivated crop in America. And the question was like, how could we work at a really small level to make a dent in that and to use all that land for something that we thought was better? And that thing was growing food.
Yeah.
And that was the initial inspiration. So we are actually not a nonprofit. A lot of people assume we are. We're a public benefit corporation. And one of the things that's really important in building this model is figuring out how to make it financially viable and scalable, again, because the problem is so huge. And so that's what we're testing out and figuring out how that can work while still really having all the social and environmental impacts that we're hoping to have.
So what are some of those social and environmental impacts that you're trying to address?
Yeah, so I mean, starting with the lawn piece, we want to turn lawns into food. And in doing that, we're going to reduce chemicals that are being used on lawns. We're going to reduce the amount of lawn mowing that has to happen.
Always nice.
Yes, and all of the petroleum products that are spilled every year through lawn care processes. We are going to increase pollinator habitat. We plant flowers in all of our gardens.
Okay.
We are going to sequester carbon. So we plant in using regenerative methods. So we don't have animals in our gardens. So we can't totally close the loop, but we do a lot to build the soil. And in doing that, we can, over time, sequester carbon and also create soil that retains water better.
Okay.
And therefore, reduce the amount of water that's being used because lawns require a lot of water.
Yeah.
Veggies do too. But if we can build healthy soil, they can reduce the amount of water that's needed over time.
Back home, Laura and Chris decided that for now, Waterwise Gardening was the best option to transform their front yard. Armed with the knowledge from the local experts, a lot of newly purchased plants, and a truckload of alpaca manure, they dove into their project following the principles of Waterwise landscaping. Step 1. Plan and design. Laura carefully measured out her yard and drew a scale diagram with the existing terrain and shade in sunny areas. Then she started adding in hardscape like boulders and pathways, and finally, plants. Step 2. Create practical turf areas. Laura and Chris didn't want any grass, so away it went. They spent several days tilling up the existing dead grass and removing the dead trees to make their yard a blank canvas for their new Waterwise garden. Step 3. Amend the soil. Laura and Chris decided to amend the soil using alpaca manure. Alpaca manure is an ideal soil amendment because it has lower nitrogen than many other livestock manures, providing nutrients and organic matter to enrich the soil without burning tender plant roots. Select and group Waterwise plants. Plants should be arranged for both attractiveness and practicality. By grouping plants with similar water needs together, by putting more water-loving plants in low parts of the yard that would naturally collect more water, Laura will be able to water smarter with less waste. Step 5. Mulch to reduce evaporation. Final step in the initial garden installation was adding a thick layer of mulch. Mulch helps the soil retain water and stay cool during hot, dry summers, and also creates a natural barrier for weeds without using pesticides or weed fabric. Laura and Chris used a mix of pine mulch and rock mulch on their garden. Step 6. Irrigate efficiently. A properly designed irrigation system can reduce water loss by targeting water exactly when and where the plants need it. Ideally, this should be done by a drip irrigation system that delivers water to the drip line of each plant. For now, Laura and Chris plan to hand water and install a drip system next year when they are done adding plants. Step 7. Maintain. Finally, a Waterwise garden requires maintenance. To avoid using too many harmful chemicals, gardeners must weed, prune, and fertilize according to each plant's needs. Let's check in with Laura and Chris to see how that's going.
I thought the project was actually somewhat easier than I anticipated. The hardest part was really just prepping the soil. I've met so many really helpful people at any garden center or the horticulturalist we talked to for this project that pointed me in the right direction for plants. And There was a lot of planning involved on my iPad, sketching out where everything was going to go. And it really turned out well, I think. It wasn't very hard. It was a rewarding journey. I've added more plants over the summer as I recognized gaps or some of them died. And the soil is just, it's night and day from the soil in our backyard. In the backyard, I stick a spade in the ground and it's just, like hitting a rock. It's so hard to clay. Here, it's really rich. You can stick your hand down in it and find like just handfuls of earthworms. So it's become a really healthy little ecosystem on its own.
Sometimes water conservation can seem like an insurmountable challenge, but reimagining how we design and experience our yards can have a huge impact on the planet. In dry areas, where watering lawns often accounts for the biggest single portion of household water consumption, swapping out turfgrass lawns for beautiful, sustainable, low-maintenance water-wise plants or bountiful vegetable gardens can cut landscape water use up to 75%. And after the initial garden installation, these water-wise landscapes are lower maintenance than the average lawn. It's a meaningful, sustainable change that you can make for your household, your wallet, your neighborhood, and our planet.